Kia ora, and thank you for setting setting aside some time today to have a bit of a chat to help out with the National Digital Forum's AGM. And thank you for rearranging, as we're saying, very early for you, getting a little bit on for me. You get to have a coffee. I'm drinking not a coffee. That will hopefully keep the conversation flowing. And as we were just talking about, I am genuinely excited to be having this conversation. There's a couple of your videos and talks and articles that you wrote that were really foundational in my career and thinking about open access and collections and storytelling and how we engage the public. And that has led me on my journey. And so it's really amazing for me to kind of look back here and have this conversation. Before we jump in, though, I will just for those who, if anyone in our audience doesn't know you, but we will give a quick introduction. So you
Lovely.
are currently the CEO of Ukie, which is the trade body for the UK's video game and interactive entertainment industry. Prior to that,
Yeah.
you were the CEO of the Chartered Institute of Library and Information Professionals, and that gets shortened to.
That's SILIP, that one. Yeah. Yeah. I'm a long history of organizations with slightly tricky acronyms. So that's SILIP.
You were the chair of the Wikimedia UK, the
Yeah.
UK chapter of the International Wikimedia Movement, and then you were also the CEO of the Collections Trust, as well as National Policy Advisor for Museums, Libraries and Archives Council. And we were just talking about there that we won't probably go into detail here, but just about the importance of Spectrum and the Collections Trust. And that's another talk, maybe a different
I'm
audience.
very glad to hear it. That's fantastic.
The so you just there you've had a career that has spanned so starting in museums and then libraries and now video games and interactive entertainment. How did that happen?
How did that work?
Yeah.
I'm super lucky, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I've had a sort of philosophical view on the world really since I was really young. My dad was a journalist and my mum was a school teacher, so I kind of came to believe in facts and evidence and storytelling and empowering people through knowledge. And so I guess the narrative that runs through the whole thing is I'm fundamentally a humanist at heart. I believe in people, and I'm amazed by human advancement. And I think the ability to transmit knowledge and ideas and kind of infect each other with ideas is just the most extraordinary human capability. And so I've always sought out roles that kind of maximize that. And it began with museums. As memorably, I think, in an episode of Doctor Who referred to as humanity's way of keeping score, the kind of how do we tell ourselves the story of our own achievements and advancement. And then libraries was just this extraordinary ability to make marks on a page and that cause other people to hallucinate wildly and imagine entire worlds and be able to empathize with other people. And then into games, so that there's this really sort of strong thread through all of those roles about humanity and the ability to transmit and share ideas.
That's awesome. And so now the different mediums that you can do that in. And so with Yuki, what's is the role of that organization? Is that to continue that sort of journey around sharing and transmitting knowledge, or
Yeah,
is it a slightly different?
hugely. I mean, it's UK Interactive Entertainment. We represent all of the video game publishers, developers, and the kind of world of people that exist to support them in the UK. And I think the reason why I was super excited to get involved here is that the video games industry has reached this moment of maturity. It's kind of come of age. It's about 40 years old, all in. So it's kind of moved. There are 3 billion players worldwide. 1.2 billion of those players play games on more than one device. It's become a global cultural phenomenon. And I think, the kind of short history of that is, I think you used the phrase earlier, move fast, break things, kind of make stuff work. But we've suddenly come to a point where video games are transforming culture, they're transforming storytelling, they're transforming education. And so what Yuki's set itself the ambition to do is to harness that moment and build the basis of a long-term industry around video games. So it's really interesting going from an industry that's like super mature, like museums and libraries have existed throughout
Yeah.
most of human history, to an industry that's really just discovering its voice. And I think the reason why is I suppose there's a few things for me. I think all sufficiently advanced technologies that are indistinguishable from magic. We live in an age of magic. We've somehow managed to normalize that because we're humans, that's what we do. But actually, the affordances of technology and what they mean in terms of breaking down barriers of culture and space and time and money are extraordinary and kind of unprecedented in human history. So coming into an industry where it's not just that they're reluctantly going there, it's like their whole essence is to explore the outer limits of technology. And so yeah, I think that theme has continued throughout the whole of my career, really.
And again, we talked a little bit before, but you've gone from I guess a way of working within museums, which are, as you say, they've been here for a while, they've got the systems in place. We're challenging, but we're not quick to move. We to then, I mean, libraries ahead of museums in lots of spaces, and now in the video games. Just for you, how are you that cultural change? Is that something you've had to kind of, I know, just down and go for it? I mean, what's the
the cultures are much more alike than you would think. I mean, I always think it's fascinating in museums that there are different tribes of practitioners. I used to do a very unfair thing. In fact, I think I did it with NDF back in the day when I was kind of touring around NZ. But that there are people who fundamentally believe museums are for people. They're there for the experience and that the kind of visitor is king. There are people who believe that the object is king, and then there are some people who'd rather just close the doors and do documentation in the darkened room and conserve things. I believe in people. I think these institutions are fundamentally about people and the narratives that they tell each other. And culturally, that's exactly the same as games. For a video game developer, the player is king, the experience is king. You kind of weave an experience around them. But I think as well, there's something around the word interactivity, right? That we don't want, and I don't think audiences are willing anymore to be passive recipients of experiences. I think they expect to be active, if not co-creators, and at least participants in their experience. And I think museums have learned that. Games are absolutely there. Libraries are getting there.
I say I was going to ask, one of the questions was, what do you think we can learn from gaming industry? What do you think the sort of, if we've got the audience of museum, library, art gallery, practitioners, what's the kind of a takeaway from you've only, and how long have you been with Ukie? It hasn't
It's like 6.5 months now.
Yeah,
So
okay.
I'm kind of I'm early enough to be new and
Yeah.
kind of there long enough to be established. What can museums learn? I think there's things both communities can learn from each other, which is why we're really keen to kind of build bridges. So I sent out a LinkedIn post saying who's interested in a kind of games slash video slash museums meetup, and I had like 250 people sign up there and then. So it's kind of I think it's a really fertile area to look at. I guess for me, the differences in digital curiosity is basically, the art of video games is constantly pushing the art of the possible with technology. What can it do? How can we make it do more? Very often when a games developer has a vision in their mind of what they want to build, the technologies don't exist, the tools won't have been built before, and so their attitude is, we know this must be possible, so we're going to find a way of doing it. We're just going to explore technologies if necessary. We're going to build new ones, and we're just going to create the experience we want to create. Whereas I remember, a lot of my work in museums was really trying to get people to be curious and excited about the art of the possible with technology. And I think there's still quite a lot of legacy of the absolute primacy of the physical situated experience. And don't get me wrong, I love physical artifacts. I'm all about the kind of physicality, but technology has the potential to extend the kind of scope and the window of that. I guess I have this theory, which is why I got involved in Wikipedia, that like back 100, 150 years ago, you were successful as an institution by being selfish. So you were successful by what could you contain within your walls. And now that has absolutely inverted. You succeed by being generous. You succeed by being outside and in the workflow of your users and all of that. And I think technology is the tool we do for that, that does that for us. And so I guess I still see some museums that are still in that kind of, we need to acquire all the things model. Whereas I'd love to see more of that kind of, let's turn this thing inside out and put the museum where the people are.
No, and I guess that the flip side, are there any challenges or watch outs or things that it's 6 months in that you think the music, we should be watching out or be careful?
Yeah, I mean, so part of the speed of video games means they're wildly amnesiac. So you ask a games developer to kind of go back to a code base they wrote, 6 months ago, and they probably won't have a copy of it. So actually, video games, interestingly, don't have much of a sense of self in terms of their progression into where they are today. And so actually, we have a National Video Games Museum that's getting started over here to try and kind of maintain some of that story. I think yeah, be careful about where the money comes from as well, because very large corporate money and kind of at-risk venture capital is challenging, and I know museums often are underfunded and largely kind of state dependent, but actually long-term sustainable investment from a public purse is not a bad place to be when you go out into the big scary world of kind of venture capital. And yeah, I mean, I think there's something here for video games about I suppose where do you get your stories from? And so we're going into an age of AI. Creativity is going to be king. Innovation and creating new intellectual property is going to be absolutely king. And there's this incredible fund of stories in museums. They are, there's no better story than history, right? And so they are the repositories of so many human stories. And I just don't think we've really begun to mine the seam of storytelling in museums yet.
Yeah, no, and I was, there's I guess one half of me is worried about the commercialization of those. There's going to be these companies. I always think of a particular genre of games which are kind of historic based, and whether they're going to want 3D scans of our artifacts, and then do they pay for that, and then they own I think we get ourselves into a really murky world. But I also think
Yeah.
we have these collections, we have these stories. How do we share them? How do we, as I said before, how do we meet the audiences where they're at? Because someone being inspired or being engaged by the collections, that's kind of where we want to end up. And I think, yeah, really exciting time for us at the moment.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think there's space at both ends of that spectrum, though. I think, on the really, really commercial side, there's a huge appetite within games for making games more historically accurate and working with curators to understand the context and the history. So the richer the world building in a historically based game, the better. So I think, you look at some of the work the Royal Armouries have done with run and gun games over here, and to kind of do the accuracy of the weapons. But interestingly, I mean, video games now are having a big conversation around public service gaming. So basically saying there are games which are educational and beneficial and good for mental health and well-being, but which are never going to be big corporate successes. And so how do we build a kind of public service end to this really big sort of corporate, very fast-moving industry?
I'm just imagining Registrar Simulator.
If it's not happened yet, it's about to, I'm sure.
Come and do some documentation for me in a gamified manner.
Love it.
That's I mean that's yeah, and you mentioned a little bit there around I guess AI, which is something we're still, I guess museums are, as always, we're here for the long run, so we're naturally cautious when taking on new technologies. I guess with the interactive entertainment industry, they're jumping on board, and they say there's going to be this sort of the sparks of creativity are just going to be, the generation of those is going to be intense. Again, a general question about AI within museums. You see possibilities there, or something we should be concerned about, or I mean, that's a huge question. Right.
I think both things are true at the same time, right? I think let's. I don't know if "concern's" the right word, but undoubtedly. Well, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, AI is a super unhelpful word. It's a portmanteau word that covers a range of technologies that have different applications in different contexts. Some of those applications are, I think, a material threat to creativity and the kind of creative industries that have grown up around it. So, building a large language model by hoovering up the entire written works of the kind of literary canon is clearly an act of copyright theft, and that needs to be addressed as such. But I've talked to people who have built their own AI for the flow of fabrics on a body in a game, and that AI tool's been licensed out to a couple of fashion houses now. I was talking to one very big developer that does sort of superhero-based movies, and they've created their own in-house large language model, which is basically their own super geek. They've fed the entire lore of the universe into it, and when they make a new game now, they can ask it whether something's canon or not.
That's
There's
amazing.
another one where it's a sports game and there are in-game press conferences with the players, and they've used a shard of Copilot to auto-generate the dialogue within those. So I mean, like, there's a million applications of this tool.
I mean, they're the kind of examples as well. I think that they're slightly different, and they're not the kind of the sometimes the big scary examples that get used, or when
No,
people, you first open up some of these programs, I don't know what to do. Like make this
yeah,
email
yeah,
sound better, and I think seeing some of these other examples so that we can see the possibilities. How could we train using our museum data? How could we create interactive experiences for our audiences that are really engaging and really have impact? So exciting.
hugely.
Yeah,
And
exciting.
I mean, there's a big dirty secret, isn't there, in museums, which I'm imagining is still the big dirty secret, which is like you've got 500,000 objects in your collection and 100,000 of them are labeled decorative object or unknown.
Unknown.
There's a big, yeah, unknown. There's a big gap in our knowledge of our collections. And
Mm.
in order to bring those things to life, I think we probably should be exploring all the tools, the kind of social collaborative. I mean, obviously, the relationship into Wikipedia and the kind of crowdsourcing knowledge. But I do think there are potential applications of AI in closing some of that knowledge gap in collections.
That's, I think, I mean, I won't go too nerdy, but I just think that idea of where we have the uncatalogued or unprocessed records, where it's just, how do we just even get something so we can begin to know, to wrap our hands around the problem. And we're looking at
Yeah, yeah,
300 years worth of human effort, but what would that look like? So that then we can prioritize, we can do the things we want to do, or the things that are going to have the most impact for the collections, for our audience. And yeah, I'm excited about that use. Again, sort of from
I
a
think it's going to be amazing. But also, I mean, how do you collect the future, right? So, I mean, a lot of our collecting capability is that kind of window of opportunity between like 1790 and 1970, and then we've got too much stuff and we're still digesting it. But the future is happening constantly, and the lived experience of a 14-year-old today is so radically different from anything you or I necessarily grew up with or would have known. And so, how we make sure that our institutions are still relevant and present and show up for those people when they hit kind of mid 30s.
I guess there's a little loop there. So we briefly touched on Spectrum and what a sort of important piece of work that is, and how it makes collection managers and registrars happy the globe over. How was something? I mean, I know how maybe you left there a long time ago, but how we need to get our standards and our policies up to date for this emerging, this new era of creativity, as well as how are we collecting things like video games or digital assets? I mean, I know from experience, the collection of digital materials scares us. It scares my institution because we just don't know how to
Yeah.
get our hands around it. It's
No, I mean it's so we often talk about the fact there's an invisible digital industrial revolution happening in the UK right now, and it's as transformational as the original industrial revolution, which was hammers and steam and big factories. But it's happening in people's bedrooms and front rooms and sitting in an internet cafe, and because it is immaterial, it's so hard to collect. So when we talk about kind of collecting video games, it's the hardware is absolutely essential as a part of the mix. So we're collecting and kind of emulating that. The software experience, but there's very seldom just one version of that software experience. The player's experience of the game, particularly now, you've got a game like No Man's Sky. I think it's 17 trillion planets procedurally generated, mostly by AI, with kind of huge input from developers. How would you catalog that when the game doesn't exist until the
yeah.
player inflates it to exist? It's a fascinating set of challenges. I think the way we're approaching it at the moment is to collect what is material, the kind of ephemeral, the design documents, and to try and weave the social history of video games through that. But yeah, we're going to have to find some way of documenting the fact that, round about 1980, humanity went online and a
Yeah.
vast majority of its activity is taking place in the invisible realm.
That's it. Again, same with our internal records. We have a beautiful internal records till about 1980, and then it
Yeah.
went on the computer, and God, we struggle. Um, and so I guess that's thinking about that. We were talking again when we started is maybe 10 years ago we were kind of going through this kind of this open access, and that's when I think I first engaged with some of your work. I think when you were at NDF was talking about make everything open and make everything accessible, and let's see the power of the crowd. How do we put the users first? And the Spectrum had come in and was helping create some of the policies around that. Do you think we're on this next invisible revolution for museums is going to be around that creativity and around that engagement and impact with audiences, or is it just a continuation of that open access journey? It's sort of thinking about the future.
It's really interesting, and it's a great set of questions. I mean, the first thing I'd say is I always think we spend more time looking at how far we haven't come rather than how far we
Yeah.
have come. And I kind of think, I mean, because obviously I've kept involved in museums and libraries through the recent work, and they are more vibrant, more relevant, more present in people's lives today than I think they've ever been. And I think a lot of museums have found ways of expressing themselves in the digital realm that begins to build some of those conversations. So I don't think we're at the big amazing dream yet that
Okay.
this is a constant dialogue between society and the institution, and that the museum is a porous and a generous institution. But we're so much further along than we were. I think I remember a lot of frustration around managerialism in museums and the need to kind of respect where the money's coming from, which has one set of values, and then the kind of cultural imperative to go open, which is another set of values. And I still think it takes quite brave leadership to open out your institution and make it a kind of dialogue with the public rather than a presentation to the public. But we've got a new generation of museum directors coming through now who are from more diverse places with richer sort of stories of their own to tell, and I think that progress is going really well. It's interesting. I was talking to a kind of fairly big game developer the other day, and that they said. We've only made small advances towards the dream we had in the 70s of ultimate interactivity, like Ready Player One. We're all going to live in these virtual spaces. And AI will help us in the next stage in that journey. But I think having a destination in mind, which is that we want the museum to become a living, breathing, relevant part of people's self-expression and culture and cultural participation. It's the right destination. I just think it's naturally going to take a very long time to get there. I just worry that every time economics bites, the kind of open principle is one of the first victims of that. It's just kind of,
Are we
let's close the doors
transforming?
and sell stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think just going to one of your points there around the brave leadership required and the change. I think through NDF we've seen a large number of institutions make that jump, and I think that leadership has shown across our sector. And also, I think you notice in the talks that we see at the conference. Where it goes from, 10 years ago when I started going, it was all about how are we going to make these open, what data standards we're going to use. We're now thinking about how we're evolving, what's the impact we want to have on society, what's the impact of all of this work. And I think it's a huge long journey, but we're 10 years into it, and it's interesting to think about what the
I love it.
next 10 years are going to be like. And yeah.
I mean, I love NDF because you've always been a kind of seditious, top secret group of disruptors that
Oh,
are aiming
yeah.
to kind of liberate museums. But no,
We'll
it's
get that
really
on the
important. I
letterhead.
think yeah, definitely. It's a bit long, but socializing the knowledge of this and the belief in this. And then I think there's something about sustaining a vision of museums as open institutions through times when economics maybe go against the grain of that, I think is really, really super important. And the people who are in your network, I mean, I always remember some of the people I engaged with back when I was kind of touring and they're your leaders now. They're kind of running Tip Upper and they're doing incredible things. And so the generation of people who are kind of watching us sit here and chat to each other today are going to go on and disrupt the industry again.
That's awesome. We are coming up to our time, and I've just a couple of final questions that have really nothing to do. You recently
Sure.
done OBE, and
Yes.
so I got
Yeah.
two questions. Is one, how do you get no like what do you get a letter post? Is it like an email? What how does it's a really boring question maybe, but how does that happen? How did you do you
Yeah.
in
I
advance?
do. I what? Sorry.
Do you find that in advance? You're on like a list or
Yeah, yeah. So they you get a very fancy looking letter from the king on very impressive kind of ivory paper saying you've been awarded an OBE, and then you spend the next 3 months wondering how the hell did that happen and who on earth
nice?
put me forward. So you get nominated for it
Yeah.
basically, and then you go along to a palace and they give you a big medal, which is absolutely the work of other people. So Spectrum was the work of a woman called Alex and a man called Gordon mostly, and I just acted as a hype man for the work they were doing. Most of the transformational change in libraries has been the result of a group of women that had a vision and have kind of driven change. So I'm massively grateful, but it's very much other people's efforts, which interestingly is what OBE stands for. Apparently, is other buggers' efforts.
Oh,
So
nice.
there you go.
And again, really silly question. Do you wear it? Like you wouldn't get like picked off.
Yeah, so if you're doing kind of like, I do have to go to some official stuff. So when you go to official stuff, you wear
Okay,
it, and then weirdly, when you're not at official things, they give you like a little pin badge version
okay.
of it
You
that's kind
know.
of super tiny. So
Yeah.
you wear one of those. But I mean, yeah, it's an interesting time to be talking monarchy and culture and all of those things. I think the thing I'm really pleased about is the kind of recognition of the social and educational impact of museums and libraries, and now increasingly games as well. Because I always think the best thing we can do is we've built a digital world now, and we need to equip children to live in it well and to thrive. And so the best thing we can do is give them spaces to play and learn and understand where it all came from, so that they can model a better world for us.
That's yeah, that's perfect. And I guess the final question, which I just had as an ending one, was just you've amazing career spanning across these big sectors. What's the one thing you're most proud of? What's the one project? What's the thing that you're most proud of, and the one thing that keeps you going?
Oh wow, that's such a great question. That it's actually one that got shut down, weirdly.
They
But
always
as
are.
a moment, so it was a thing called the Culture Grid, and the Culture Grid was really the first UK cultural aggregator, and it was back when Europeana was sort of kicking off and all of that. And it was understanding that if we're going to make the transition from the kind of cultural practices of the past to the future, we need cultural infrastructures. We need ways of aggregating and sharing at huge scale. And so that project was a piece of cultural infrastructure which kind of went on to become something else, and it got shut down in its original form. But it essentially made real the unlocking of collections, and for me that was a huge moment.
That's it. Oh, that's amazing. And I remember Culture Grid and that kind of that idea. And again, something that we're still seeing across a project I'm working on at the moment is still thinking about how do we aggregate even at small scales, and how do we make things accessible to people. And we digitize all these things, and that then what? And
Yes.
that's
Then where does
that's
it
the
go?
exciting bit, and that's where we're at now. Thank you
Yeah.
again, for taking the time your morning to hang out with me. Thank you for getting. Are you naturally an early bird, or is
Yeah, I'm afraid I've been up for a couple of hours already, so
okay?
it's it's
That's
really
good.
great to chat to you. Thank you so much.
Awesome, and we hope to see you again soon, or at some point in the future. And you can come over to NDF and share maybe after a little bit more time with Yuki to be able to share how the gaming industry, interactive entertainment can further sort of evolve and grow with the cultural heritage sector. Awesome, thank you
Would
so much.
love to. Brilliant. Have a great day.
See you later.